The first alarm in our apartment was never mine. It was the hallway light. Then the bathroom light. Then the closet door opening hard enough to shake the frame. Then his voice tossing a command at the speaker on the kitchen shelf, loud and casual, like sunrise itself worked for him. Then the boots. Always the boots. Heavy, deliberate, full-soled boots meeting old floorboards while the sky outside was still the color of wet cement. My actual alarm was set for 8:45. Sometimes 9 if I had closed late and knew I could steal another 15 minutes. His noise usually started around 5:30. Sometimes earlier. Sometimes so early, my body could not even understand what it was waking from. I would surface into the dark with my heart already sprinting, not because there was danger exactly, but because my nervous system had begun to treat him like one. At first I made excuses for it. People do that when they still want the story to be fixable. I told myself morning people always sound harsher to night people. I told myself small apartments amplify everything. I told myself stress makes everyone sloppy. I told myself maybe I was extra sensitive because I was tired, and maybe I was tired because I had been working too much, and maybe once the schedule calmed down, the tenderness would come back by itself. But tenderness does not come back by itself. Not when someone is actively stepping over it. I worked in events, the kind of work that looks glamorous from far away and feels like carrying furniture uphill from close up. Most nights I got home after 11. During busy stretches it was later than that. There were client crises, last-minute changes, floral emergencies, equipment delays, missing drivers, missing invoices, missing sanity. By the time I came through the apartment door, my feet ached so badly that taking off my shoes felt emotional. I was proud of what I was doing, though. That was the thing. I was not just working hard because life had trapped me there. I was rebuilding. The year before, I had finally gotten serious about my own life. Serious about paying off debt. Serious about saving money. Serious about not letting old numbing habits define me anymore. I had become disciplined in ways I had once only pretended to be. I kept spreadsheets. I packed lunches. I picked up extra shifts instead of extra excuses. I started believing that if I could just hold the line long enough, my life would eventually start to feel like mine. Nate liked telling people he was proud of me. He said it warmly at parties. He said it to friends. He said it to my face in public. But pride is cheap when it does not show up in the kitchen. Pride is cheap when it does not wash one plate. Pride is cheap when it cannot lower its own volume for the person doing the rebuilding. He got home earlier than I did most nights, sometimes much earlier. That should have meant dinner started, laundry folded, the apartment at least vaguely held together by 2 adults instead of 1. Instead, it meant the television had probably been on for hours, a game paused mid-level, a bowl in the sink with something drying to its sides, and our cat weaving angrily around my ankles because no one had bothered to fill his dish. I would set my bag down, change clothes, feed the cat, clean the pan from the night before, start something simple on the stove, and listen to Nate describe his own fatigue from the couch, like we had contributed equally to the evening. Still, even then I would have told you we were just going through a rough season. That is one of the quiet dangers of slow disappointment. Nothing is spectacular enough to force clarity. You just keep adjusting your standards downward and calling it maturity. The sleep thing began as a drift. Or that is how I remember it now. One bright bathroom light left on too long. One cabinet door shut harder than usual. One cheerful shout at the speaker asking for weather, traffic, a playlist. Anything that could have been whispered or typed with one hand and a little care. The first few times I mumbled, "Can you keep it down?" He would say sorry in the flat automatic tone people use when they expect the conversation to expire on contact. Then, 2 mornings later, it would happen again. What made it impossible to dismiss was not the noise itself. It was the fact that he had not always been this way. For years, he had known exactly how to move quietly. He used the flashlight on his phone instead of the overhead light. He closed drawers with his hand on the edge. He put shoes on by the door. He treated sleep like something shared, and therefore worth protecting. So when he suddenly began moving through dawn, like a man testing the acoustics of every room, I could not fully believe in innocence. Not for long. One Tuesday, I had closed an event that ran late because the family could not agree on the final seating chart until guests were already arriving. The whole night had that particular texture of preventable chaos. I came home after midnight with my hair pinned into a shape I no longer recognized, and mascara somewhere near my jaw. The cat bowl was empty. The kitchen smelled faintly of takeout and stale grease. Nate was asleep with one arm over his face and the living room lamp still on. I remember turning it off and thinking, absurdly, maybe tomorrow I'll get to sleep, as if sleep were something kind that might choose me. At 5:17, the closet light snapped on. At 5:18, the bathroom fan began its dry electric hum. At 5:20, I heard him say, loud as a stage cue, Alexa, turn on kitchen lights. At 5:21, the boots started. At 5:22, the apartment door opened and shut once, then opened again because he had forgotten something, then shut hard enough to rattle the framed print above our table. I lay there staring at the ceiling with that awful combination of exhaustion and adrenaline that makes falling back asleep feel like trying to climb onto a moving train. When my alarm finally rang hours later, it felt insulting, as if I had not already done a full shift inside my own body. That morning, I told him calmly that I needed him to stop. Not in the vague couples therapy language people use when they are trying to avoid sounding needy. I said, plainly, I am not getting enough sleep. You are waking me up hours early. Please stop turning on all the lights and stomping around when you know I don't have to be up yet. He shrugged and said, you're still getting sleep. Still getting sleep. As if quantity were the only measure. As if broken rest counts the same as rest. As if the person losing it should trust the person causing it to define the damage. After that, I started noticing everything more sharply. Maybe because once pain is named, it stops disguising itself as inconvenience. I noticed that he always put the boots on inside the bedroom instead of by the door. I noticed that he asked the speaker for things he could have checked silently on his phone. I noticed that when I had a rare later morning, he somehow became even louder, as though unused hours offended him personally. I noticed that he never once said, let me make tonight easier for you if tomorrow starts early for me. The apartment itself began to feel complicit. The pale rectangle of closet light under the door. The harsh bathroom bulbs flattening the air. The speaker's cheerful voice answering him before dawn like a witness too pleased with itself. The boots by the bed waiting like an argument with laces. Even my pillow started to feel defensive, as if it knew I would be dragged back out of it before my body had finished the repair work. I got meaner in my own head before I ever got mean out loud. That is another thing exhaustion does. It strips away all the little diplomatic curtains you normally hang over disappointment. By the third week, I was standing at work, smiling at clients while privately fantasizing about throwing those boots into the river. By the fourth week, I could feel my patience thinning in public. A florist arrived late and I nearly cried. A coworker asked if I was okay and I said yes so fast it sounded hostile. Every morning headache followed me into the day like a bruise behind my eyes. And still, at home, the labor remained mine. Dinner if we wanted to eat something that had touched a pan. Laundry if I wanted clean sheets. Cat food if I wanted to stop feeling guilty on behalf of an animal. Trash if I wanted the kitchen not to smell tired before I did. Nate treated domestic life the way some people treat hotel housekeeping. Invisible when it is done well, irritating when it requests acknowledgement. One Friday night I came home after a double that had bled into an extra meeting with a client who kept using the phrase simple changes while describing things that would add 6 hours to the next day. My calves cramped while I stood at the stove boiling pasta. Nate wandered in, opened the fridge, took a drink straight from the carton, and asked if I was in a bad mood. I laughed once, which was not really laughter. I asked whether he had fed the cat. He said he forgot. Then he asked why I was always on edge lately. I wanted to tell him that chronic exhaustion turns your whole life into an exposed nerve. I wanted to tell him I was not on edge, I was being scraped away. Instead, I said, because I'm tired. He kissed the side of my head in that distracted, performative way that feels less like comfort than branding, and said, you worry too much. The breaking point came on a Monday. Not because the morning was worse than all the others, but because I had finally run out of spare meaning to assign it. The night before, I had cried while asking him, actually cried, if he could please just let me sleep. I told him I could not keep starting my days from a deficit. I told him my head hurt every morning. I told him I felt like I was going crazy because I could hear him being louder after I asked for less noise. I told him it did not feel accidental anymore. He looked at me with the faint half-smile people use when they are preparing to dismiss emotion as melodrama. Then he said I was making way too big a deal out of mornings. At 5:04, the speaker blared alive. At 5:06, every light between the bedroom and kitchen was on. At 5:08, I heard him slam the bathroom drawer, then actually hum, while pulling on the boots. I sat up in bed before I was fully awake. Something in me had stopped trying to preserve the old version of him. When he came back into the room to grab his keys, I said very quietly, "Do you hear yourself?" He looked at me blankly. I said, "I asked you not to do this. I begged you not to do this." And he laughed. Not a huge, cruel movie laugh. Something smaller. Worse, maybe. The laugh of a person who believes your pain has become absurd. Then he said, "Oh my God, you act like this is torture. There are moments when a relationship ends before anyone moves out. This was mine." Not because the sentence was uniquely evil. Because it gathered all the previous mornings behind it and named them correctly. He knew. He knew I was exhausted. He knew I had asked. He knew he used to be able to move quietly. He knew the housework was falling on me. He knew I had been trying to drag my life into a better shape with bare hands. And when I offered him one last chance to care, he chose mockery because mockery was easier than change. After he left, the apartment looked strange in daylight, as if some film had peeled off my eyes overnight. The unwashed mug by the sink was not a small oversight, it was evidence. The cat bowl was not an innocent empty dish, it was evidence. The boots by the bed were not random clutter, they were evidence. I walked through each room and felt the full weight of how much of my energy had been converted into cushioning someone else from the consequences of being himself. I did not text him a long explanation. I did not research the perfect article about sleep deprivation and emotional abuse. I did not wait to become more certain than I already was. I called my sister. Then I called in late to work. For the first time in almost a year. Then I slept for 3 hours in an apartment that still smelled like him. And when I woke up, I began packing the things that were unmistakably mine. I took the blue mug my grandmother had given me. The framed photograph from the beach town where I had once promised myself I would become a calmer person. My nice knives, because I knew if I left them, he would keep using them without ever sharpening them. My notebooks. My chargers. The soft gray blanket that had survived 3 apartments and one bad version of myself. Each object felt less like property and more like a witness I was escorting out safely. He called around noon. I let it ring. He called again. Then he texted, "Are you seriously still mad?" There it was. Not concern, not apology, not even confusion honest enough to invite an answer. Just irritation that my injury had outlived his attention span. I wrote back once. I said, "I am not mad about one morning. I am done explaining why I deserve rest in my own home." He sent 3 dots. Then nothing. That evening, after work, I went to my sister's place with 2 duffel bags, and the cat carrier wedged awkwardly against my knee. She opened the door, looked at my face, and did not ask me to defend the decision. There is a kind of mercy in being believed at first sight. I sat on her couch and ate toast over the sink because I was too tired for a plate. When I finally slept, the apartment was almost unnaturally quiet. No speaker, no boots, no doors teaching my body to flinch. I woke the next morning terrified I had overslept. Then I saw the clock. 8:42. My own alarm had not gone off yet. For a full 10 seconds, I just stared at the ceiling and felt my body trying to understand what safety sounded like. It sounded like nothing. Nothing forced. Nothing slammed. Nothing laughing at me from the doorway. People like to imagine that leaving happens after the biggest offense. After the betrayal so obvious even strangers could diagram it. But sometimes you leave because of repetition. Because a person keeps placing comfort on one side of the scale and your well-being on the other, and each morning the decision comes down exactly the same. Because love without care becomes theater. Because the body learns truths, the mind keeps trying to negotiate away. I did not leave because he woke up early. I left because he had become fully informed about what his choices were doing to me, and treated that information like something funny. I left because I was rebuilding a life, and he seemed most animated when he could chip at the foundation before sunrise. I left because I finally understood that exhaustion is not always the price of ambition. Sometimes it is the price of staying too close to someone who benefits from your depletion. Weeks later, when people asked what ended us, I noticed how tempted I was to make the answer sound bigger, cleaner, easier to respect. To say we wanted different futures. To say the relationship had run its course. To say the timing was bad. Those things are tidy. They let everyone leave the conversation with their shoes still clean. The truer answer felt almost embarrassingly domestic. He would not let me sleep. Even after I asked. Even after I cried. Even after he knew. But maybe that is not a small answer at all. Maybe the clearest measure of love is what someone does when your need is plain, reasonable, and inconvenient to them. Maybe character lives there, in the unglamorous hour before dawn, when no one is watching and kindness would cost almost nothing. The last thing I collected from the apartment was a small fabric bag from the back of the closet. Inside were earplugs I had bought in a hopeful phase, before I admitted to myself that a solution requiring me to go partly deaf in my own bed was not a compromise. It was a warning. I held that little bag in my palm and almost laughed. Not because any of it was funny, because I could suddenly see the whole month for what it had been. Me adapting to damage while calling it partnership. I threw the earplugs away at a gas station on the drive back to my sister's. It felt ceremonial. A small, private refusal. I am not going to survive love by muting myself inside it. I am not going to call contempt a misunderstanding because it arrives in slippers and shared rent. I am not going to keep proving my exhaustion to someone who liked me best when I was too tired to question him. Now, when my alarm rings, it is mine. Just mine. A soft sound. A fair one. A sound that asks for my attention instead of stealing it. And every morning I answer it, I feel a little closer to the life I had been trying to build all along. Not a perfect life, not an easy one, but one where rest is not something I have to beg for from the person sleeping closest to me.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.